Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming. I especially want to thank Professor Byers and the faculty for setting this event up. And I'm going to hand this off to Adam in a quick second after telling you all about the MIS Club, which partnered with UOM to make this happen. The MIS Club is an undergraduate business club that represents the IT management concentration here in Charlotte. And we are here to kind of serve as your liaison for getting into your early career that's in between business and technology. We represent management information systems for those of you that might have heard it that way. And we'll be welcome to answer any questions that you all may have. If you can visit our website, misclub.contact.edu. Other than that, I'm going to pass this on to Adam.
Thanks, Alan. Like you said, my name is Adam Bourne. I'm the president of the Undergraduate Operations Management Society here in Charlotte. And just like MIS Club, UOMS is the club to connect students to undergraduate operations management resources as well as supply chain. And if you're looking to find more information about our club, you can find that on our Facebook page on the Charlotte Club's organization website. And with that being said, I'd like to give a brief introduction to Mr. Snyder, and we can go ahead and get started. Mr. Snyder is the founder of the Project Management Institute, a fellow of the Institute, and a past volunteer executive director, president, and chairman of the board. He's the chair emeritus of the board of directors of the PMI Educational Foundation and advisor to the board of the Delaware Valley chapter. Mr. Snyder, who is casually referred to as the father of PMI, has been awarded the PMI Man of the Year Award and is an honorary life member of the Institute. He's also a founding member of the PMI Delaware Valley chapter in the Pharmaceuticals Specific Interest Group, or SIG. Mr. Snyder served as the project manager for the construction of the PMI's world headquarters in Newtonsburg, Pennsylvania, the PMI James R. Snyder Center for Project Management, Knowledge, and Wisdom, located in the headquarters building, is named in his honor. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jim Snyder.
Thank you very much. So, how many of you folks are intending to be project managers for the rest of your lives? I'm overwhelmed. Let me just say that some of you will be. Because no matter what you do when you leave here and go on, whether it's a further degree or whether it's a different profession or what it is, your rest of your life will be managing projects. The world is changing. It's changing very rapidly. And everything we do is a project in one way or another. And we're going to be learning how to manage projects or we're going to fail completely. And some of this has come about over long periods of time with the beginnings of the nuclear age, the Polaris submarine, and a number of other major projects that got the project management profession started in the 50s to what it is today. So think in terms that maybe one of these days I might be a project manager. It's a strange profession. Those of us who have been in it for a long time find that we didn't plan it, we didn't pick it, we might not even have wanted it, but we are project managers. You all know the old story, 6 months ago I couldn't spell engineer, now I am one. Well, project management is very much like that. One day somebody will say to you, oh, by the way, I want you to manage this project. So you need to know a little bit about project management and the project management profession. Which brings me now to why are we here? Why am I here? I'm here because PMI, the Project Management Institute, is now 50 years old. It would not exist without Georgia Tech. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go along. But it was this institution, this city, and the people who were students back in the late 60s, and the people who were involved in project management in the area, in the Atlanta area, that got us off to a quick start. So let's take a look at where did we come from? Why are we here? And why should you know something about what's going on in project management profession? One of the librarians at the Library of Congress said this, unless you know about yesterday, you can't create a new tomorrow. So what I'm going to try to do is tell you a bit about yesterday, about what was going on 50 years ago and why that's important today. Now, having said that, you guys are all smart enough to realize that if I'm a founder of the organization and it's 50 years old, I had to have been 8 when I started it. So we'll We'll let that go now, and if I stumble around a bit, it's partly age. But let's take a look back in time and see how it all got started. What did the world look like in 1969? There's the internet. It was 4 nodes. Now, this little map and 4 dots tells a tremendous story. What it says is that communications was very, very difficult. Communications, exchanging information was difficult in the 60s. If you wanted to know the answer to something you didn't reach in your pocket, pull out a cell phone, Google it, and have an answer. You actually had to use some of the other communications tools, and there weren't very many of them available to us, but there were a few. One of which was writing. We used this stuff called paper. You used to buy it in large bundles, and it came with a stick with a bit of ink on the end of it. And you could make marks on the paper and write and fold up your ideas, gather them all together, wait until the fire department left, and then put your idea committed to this paper into an envelope which you licked. And then you put a thing called a stamp on it, and you had to lick that too, and dropped it in a box. And away it went. And then you waited. And you waited. And 3 weeks, maybe a month later, the envelope came back to you, or one similar to it, and you ripped it open, enthusiastic to see what your colleagues on the West Coast thought of the great idea you had just communicated. You unfolded the paper and it said, "Great idea." And then we went through the cycle again and again, trying to communicate some very new and very basic concepts. Telephones were not like they are today. If you wanted to talk to Europe, you booked a call. You called the telephone company and set up an appointment to call Germany. It was a very, very different world. It was not easy to exchange ideas, and there were some new ideas. Some of those new ideas came about because of the 11-inch aluminum sphere. You all know what I'm talking about. We called it Sputnik. It sort of flipped over the Georgia Tech campus. And there was a high school down at the end of 5th Street, I believe, or 5th and Techwood or something, with a school there that had a bit of an athletic field. And as a student, I'd lay out there at night in the summertime and look up in the air and watch this silly thing go over. And you could actually see Sputnik fly over the Georgia Tech campus. And this scared people to death. This was Russia's invitation to do something. And we did. We responded with a project. And they even called it that, the Polaris Missile Project, which was a direct and immediate response to what had happened with the launching of the first commercial or military type satellite. As a result of that project, the Department of Navy Weapons and a number of other groups got together and put together some planning systems that were revolutionary at the time, Pert Cpm. Anybody in the room ever heard of Pert Cpm? Just want to get a feel for something. Okay, maybe a third at least heard. One of the many, many planning tools available to us today that make up the different ways so we can handle project-oriented information came out of that Polaris Missile Project and led to the control room at NASA and led to the building of Hartsfield Airport and led to every major construction project that you see around you. And now there's no major IT project that's undertaken without some form of project planning systems being used. So all of these ideas came out of the 1960s, and they're bubbling, and we're trying to communicate them. And I'm saying things like, I've got this problem in the pharmaceutical industry. How do I allocate resources into the future? I've got 20 or 30 potential compounds, all of which need chemists, and how many do I need to do what? We were able to use some of these new tools to determine things like how many biochemists do we need 10 years out to cover the projects that we have in hand. And these were exciting things that we wanted to share with other people. But sharing them, as you can see, was difficult. And then came along some really good planning and scheduling tools, one of which was called Management Scheduling and Control System from a company that you all have never heard of called McDonnell Douglas Automation Company, the spin-off of the McDonnell aircraft. And the reason the automation company existed is sort of interesting. McDonnell Douglas built airplanes. The plane that it was most famous for building at that time was F-14 or 15 jet fighter. So they're building this plane in St. Louis, and they have to make revisions and changes, and they needed a wind tunnel. So they built one of the world's largest wind tunnels to test the F-15. And it had over computer capacity. They used it once a month, and then it sat there. So they formed a company called McDonnell Douglas Automation to create IT programs and projects that could be sold to the general public to keep their computers running and pay for their new wind tunnel. Now, let me put this place in perspective. They had about 35 or 40 young people who had three-wheel bicycles. And their job was to ride around the floor of the automation company. And they'd get a little note in the morning that said, go to machine 26, take off the tape, take that tape to machine 19, mount it, take the tape from 19 to 32. And all day long, they're changing magnetic tapes. Now, how do you change magnetic tapes? And it's done. We don't even use magnetic tapes anymore. But this was a big operation, and their system was fantastic. And they decided to sell it. And we looked at it at Smith Klein and French Laboratories where I worked, and it turned out to be a pretty good project or product, so we decided to purchase it. We bought it, installed it, and of course, once you do something like that, you have to celebrate. So we decided that a celebration that would be effective would be to go out to dinner. Ned Engman, who was the salesman for McDonnell Douglas, Susan Gallagher, who was my assistant and who was teaching all my project management courses for me at the time, and I went to a restaurant in Philadelphia called the Three Threes. This is in December, and it started to snow. Now, Ned was originally from Texas and didn't like snow at all. So he decided he couldn't fly out that night, ordered more wine, and we sat down to talk. And the discussion went like this. I had been teaching project management at Smith Klein now for a number of years, and I wanted to learn some more about it. I knew that I was not fully equipped to understand how to manage project-oriented work. So I looked for courses, and I found one. It was at Georgia Tech. Gee, I've been there, spent a few years there myself. So I decided to come back here and learn about project management at a short course, which was run by the School of Industrial Engineering by a gentleman by the name of Dr. J. Gordon Davis. Dr. Davis was from the University of Florida originally, and we excused that and let him onto the Tech campus. And he did a very good job of producing public education in project management. About the fourth day or the third day of the 4-day course, he came up to me and said, you know, you're a ringer. I said, what do you mean? He said, you know as much about this stuff as I do. What are you doing in my course? And my answer to him was, well, Gordon, I came down here to look at your curriculum, learn what you're teaching, get a hold of all of your examples in your curriculum, steal all that stuff, and go back to Philadelphia and use it to teach courses at Smith Klein and French Laboratories. And that was the beginning of a 50-year friendship. From that point on, Gordon and I were very, very close friends. And he had been inviting me to come here 3, maybe 4 times a year for the next, this is the mid-50s now. A long time ago, geez. I would come the last day of his course, and do sort of a wrap-up. And then we would have a question and answer session. And the question and answer session always started with, this has been great. We've learned a tremendous amount about planning and scheduling tools. We now understand some of the concepts of how to manage project work, but how do we keep up with this? Here's a field that's growing very fast. You have to understand that at that time I was doing a master's degree at Drexel University, and my thesis, you got to write a thesis then, my thesis was on where project management should be located within a corporation. At which time I read every book written on project management, every single book, and liked both of them. Now, this is very different than it is today, where there are thousands of books on project management, literally thousands of books. So we had come together here in Atlanta, we ran these courses, and we kept getting the question, how do we continue to learn? How do we continue to build our knowledge? How do we find out what's new, what the real techniques are that are working? How do we hear it from the people that are using them? And the discussions went on and on. Back to the 3 threes in a wintry, stormy night in Philadelphia. Ned said to me, look, you and Gordon have been talking about bringing people together to share information. Let's be project managers. Let's quit talking about it and do something about it. So we decided that we would meet, and that the thing that we needed to do was to structure a seminar symposia, a meeting, bring people together someplace to share ideas and to exchange ideas. We did not set out to start a profession, that's for sure. We didn't start out to form an organization. We set out to offer a forum where information could be exchanged freely and openly between competing companies in a lot of cases. Where to have it? Well, you know, we've got nothing. There are 3 of us. Gordon approached the School of Industrial Engineering, and they made a proposal. And the proposal went like this. You can hold the meeting at Georgia Tech. We'll provide the space. We will buy you lunch for the 2 days. We'll pay for all the breaks. We'll handle the registration, process the money. We'll print a brochure for you that you create, and we'll mail it to a list of people from every course Gordon has ever taught or anybody else around here has taught on project management. And at the end of the day, if you make money, you can keep it. And if you lose money, we'll cover it. So we debated. And 12 and a half nanoseconds later, we decided that that might be a pretty good deal. So we took that deal. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what really started the Project Management Institute, was the risk-taking by the Department of Industrial Engineering that a group of folks from across the United States in diverse industries who had a weird idea about bringing people together to share information freely might actually work. And they're the ones who supported our first seminar symposia in Advanced Project Management Techniques, October 9-10, 1969. So where did we come from? Where did it all get really started? Here in Atlanta, here on this campus. And I talk about this all over the world. Without the support of Georgia Tech, without the support of the schools here and the people here, we would not have existed. We know exactly when it got started. If you can read that, it says that on February the 11th, my wife, who used to write to our family regularly and keep them up to date with what was going on, said, looks like it's really going to happen. We're going to quit talking about this, and all the things that have been going on for the last couple of years are going to come to a head in New Orleans. Why New Orleans? Because Ned Ingman was not about to go back to Philadelphia where he'd get caught in another bloody snowstorm. So off we went to New Orleans and sat in a Roosevelt hotel to see if we couldn't put together the ideas of holding a seminar symposium. This is the motley crew. I'm pictured there next to Ned, Susan Gallagher, Ned's good friend Eric Jeanette, who is Vice President of Civil Engineering for Brown and Root, and my friend Gordon Davis here from Georgia Tech. And it was the five of us that met for 3 days to sort of put together this symposium. I'd like to just take some time to tell you about some of the people, because I think it'll help you understand the organization. Ned was a character, Texan. You all know Texans? Any Texans here? Okay, anyway. Ned was a Texan. And he liked to smoke cigars, and we like to work hard. And as you will hear later, PMI has always been an organization that meets early and works late and can't do anything without food. So based on those principles, we were meeting from 7 in the morning until 6 at night in the hotel, debating the issues of when, where, how, and what to do about holding a symposium. Doesn't sound like it's hard to do, but it's a lot of work when you've never done it before. And then we would go off and play hard. We'd have dinner and go out and try Bourbon Street and some of the places around there. And I have a picture somewhere of Ned. I can't find it, but one of these days it's going to turn up in my pile of pictures. Ned at the old Absent House on Bourbon Street, cigar in his hand, drink in the other hand, leaning against a column, sound asleep. And this sort of is the kind of picture you get of your founders. Susan, of course, was a tremendous help to us. She's the one that got things done. She was my right hand at SmithKline, and she continued to be with the founding of the organization. Eric was the philosopher. Eric would sit in the meetings and say nothing for 2.5 hours after we had been debating some silly little point that really didn't make any difference. And he'd finally say in a deep Southern voice, he was also a Texan, "What I think we ought to do is," and you knew that's what you ought to do. There wasn't going to be any question about it. Eric had said it. Gordon brought the academic approach to everything we did and questioned why and how and where and when we would do it. So that was the team that put together the beginning of what it became PMI. To summarize those things, here are some of the actual things we accomplished. We did begin to put together a charter. We looked at formulating a name. We called it the American Planning and Scheduling Society. We got smart to that real fast before we even incorporated and changed it to the Project Management Institute, realizing that what we were dealing with was much broader than just planning and scheduling. We selected chairman and co-chairman, Gordon and I, to run the first meeting. And of course, we began to cooperate with our sponsors at Georgia Tech and to put together the brochures and the announcements and so forth for the meeting. There's our first brochure. There actually is a copy of it laying around. It talks about who the speakers are and what the papers will be, much like any brochure you would see today. But I think it's very interesting as to the speakers. Russell Archibald's world-known consultant in project management. Dr. David Cleland. If you ever take a project management course somewhere along the line, you will read something that David Cleland has written. He just passed away recently, but he wrote prolifically on project management and project management systems. John Fondle didn't believe that computers had a place in project management. He was a protagonist for us in a lot of ways. He came around finally. He also started a profession almost, in that he's probably the first person I know who worked for the state of California or any other state using project management tools in highway construction litigation for completion or non-completion of projects. James E. Kelly, CPM, he's the one that developed it. He was there to talk about it. And Dr. Martino and Dr. Schaefer also presented papers. We had a distinguished group of people to speak for the 2-day program. And we met at Georgia Tech. And that's what your school looked like in 1969. That is the entire campus. I think the outer limit on the horizon there is about 10th Street. So you can get some idea of what things look like in those days. And this is where we met. Still there, the Guggenheim building. I don't know why the School of Industrial Engineering found that for us as a place to meet, except that if any of you are old enough to remember the old School of Industrial Engineering, do you remember their building? I mean, it was a fire trap in the 60s, and I think it's still there. Do you know if it's right behind the tower? It looked like a warehouse, a long train shed, almost kind of building.
It's the French building.
French, yeah. Well, that place was a dump then. I mean, so we were very happy to meet in the Guggenheim building.
There are still faculty in there, so we don't tell them.
Well, I hope you have good insurance policies.
We have Coda and they got your building, so we think it's a good.
Okay, so this is it, the Guggenheim building. I can't find the exact room, but I know that that's where we actually held the first the seminar symposium. Now, as I said earlier, PMI, if you were to join our organization, you would learn very quickly that it does nothing without food. The key ingredient to project success is food. You have to have food. So we had to have a dinner between the two one-day sessions. And we went off to a hotel in downtown Philadelphia, and it was called the American Motor Hotel. And it was located behind what is now the Peachtree Plaza. I believe if you look at this little triangle of land right here, if any of you know the Peachtree Plaza, that's where their back door is, where you pull up to park your car. And the reason that this is a historic photo is they tore this bloody dump down 6 weeks after we had met there. It was really bad, but it was cheap, and we were able to have our dinner there. During the dinner, I was asked to do a presentation, which I did, which was sort of based on a profile of an organization. By that time, we had realized that what people really wanted not only was a one-time meeting, but they wanted the connections. What they wanted was LinkedIn. What they had was a pen and a paper. So what we were trying to do was to build a way for them to get the benefits of what we now know as our electronic communications and our social media systems through other media. And I offered people to join the organization that evening. There were 78 people at the first seminar symposium. And of those 78, 23 joined that night for an annual dues of $15 a year, gone up just a little bit. And we were started as an organization. I think the next morning, we had our first board of directors meeting, and it suddenly dawned on us that there was something now in existence that we had to do something about. I had incorporated the organization in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, simply because I found a cheap lawyer who was willing to help us out. We'd gotten some fantastic contributions before the meeting started. McDonnell Douglas gave us $200. Brown and Root gave us $200. SmithKline French gave us $200. And on $600, we started PMI. About half of which went to our cheap lawyer to get us incorporated. And he's still around today. We're going to drag him out to our 50th celebration, I hope. Now, at that very first board meeting, I somehow got volunteered to be the president. And I served as president and then as chairman of the board. And at the end of that time, we decided that the organization was now moving along. We were having meetings on an annual basis. And we had some fantastic meetings in the early days. The second meeting was held in St. Louis, sponsored by McDonnell Douglas. And the master of ceremonies was the head of the Tennessee Valley Authority representing the Corps of Engineers, Major General Bill Starnes. Major General Bill Starnes showed up at the conference in full dress uniform with a whistle. And when the sessions changed, you heard Bill blowing the whistle, and you better move because you had a major general standing behind you saying, it's time to get in that room. He was one of the early supporters of the organization. But at that point in time, we decided that we needed something a little more permanent, and I got volunteered to be the executive director and ran the organization from our first corporate headquarters. So I thought I might take a few minutes and just give you a tour of the corporate headquarters, the places PMI has been, and the places that it's worked from, so that you can see sort of how the organization has grown. Here's our first corporate office. That's the dining room in my home. That's what it looked like 50 years ago, and that's what it still looks like today, although I did manage to get rid of the high chair. So I'm actually getting to the point now that I'm ready to move to the retirement village in the next 4 or 5 months. And when I do that, PMI has said, well, you know, your dining room table is not going to fit in your retirement apartment. Why don't you just give it to us and we will put together a conference room at corporate headquarters that uses your dining room table from which we ran the organization for the first 15 years. So I'm going to be giving them my dining room table. As the organization grew, we began to need some corporate help or some secretarial kind of help. I hired a young lady who was still in high school. She, in fact, had her 16th birthday in Montreal at a PMI meeting. We took her off along with us to the meeting, and she had a fantastic time and a wonderful birthday. You couldn't do some of those things today, but that's the way it worked in the old days. And Karen ran our office. She was everything. Karen decided that she was tired of coming to my house and working off of my dining room table, so she persuaded us to rent our first office space. It was the 2 windows above where the red arrow is, and it was over the meat market next to the bar. And you know your organization is really well known internationally and has a lot of prestige when people say, where is it? And the answer is over the meat market and next to the bar. That's how you located PMI in the early days. Our office furniture was completely donated by SmithKline and French Laboratories. They didn't know it, but they did. And I guess I really have to explain that. I didn't in some of my other presentations. But one of my jobs was doing some of the office planning at SmithKline, and we were replacing office furniture all over the building just at the time when we needed some. And I went to the financial people and said, gee, can I have some of the old stuff you're going to trash? And they said, you know, we'd really love to give it to you, but for insurance reasons, it's always either for legal or for insurance reasons. They have a coin and they flip it. And heads, it's insurance reasons, and tails, it's legal reasons that you can't do something. So it was decided that we probably, you know, they couldn't give us the material. So on the Saturday morning when they were taking the old furniture out and putting the new furniture in, they were literally putting it in a dumpster. I rented a truck, parked it next to the dumpster, and they brought the furniture down, put it in the dumpster, and I had some folks there, and we picked it up out of the dumpster and put it in the truck. And that's how we furnished the first corporate offices for EMI. I understand some of you are interested in IT. You're going to be going into some IT jobs in the future. You might be interested in our IT department in those days. Here it is. It was a Selectric typewriter. Don't knock those things. They really did an awful lot of work, but that was our full and complete IT department. We outgrew that space, and we moved to an apartment that I don't have a picture of here. It was an apartment that had 2 shop front stores. We rented first one and then the other. 6 months later, we rented the apartment behind the stores. And then we rented all of the apartments on the first floor. And then we rented all of the apartments on the second floor. And we were about to have rented all of the apartments on the 3rd floor when the woman who lived in the last surviving apartment didn't want to leave. So we had to, because she cooked cabbage every day of the week. And it just got to be too much. We had to move out of there. So we decided it was time to buy our own building. And this is the first purchased building that PMI ever owned. 120 State Street, Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, just outside the city of Philadelphia. It lasted about 2 years or 3 years for us, and then became so overcrowded that we had to make our next move. So we sold it. And then it was sold again. And I think on the third selling, it became Delaware County's first medical marijuana distribution center. So we're very proud of the fact that our office has been repurposed into something that's useful. We went from that facility there to Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, on the old Sunoco Oil Research property, where they were building an office campus, and we built the building you see here. It was originally intended to be a two-phase project. You're looking at phase one. Phase two would look exactly like it and mirror it on the right-hand side, attaching the two buildings. The idea is we would be here for 6 to 8 years and then build the addition and expand our space. As it turned out, the day we cut the ribbon to move into the first phase, we broke ground for the second phase because we were growing so fast. It was at that point in time that PMI undertook certification. It was at that point in time where we began to offer the project management professional certification, which nowadays is the gold standard for being recognized as a professional in the project management profession. And for any of those of you who are going to end up being IT project managers, at least even for a short period of time, take the time and get that certification. It will make a big difference in whether you get a job or not. Quite frankly, most employers today flip through resumes when they're looking for IT project managers, and if it doesn't say PMP, they just don't even look at it. I'm not real thrilled with that. I don't really believe in the certification program quite the way it is, but the facts are the facts. We are recognized as the professional organization for project managers, and it really has become a requirement if that's what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So here's what that second building looked like. It was just a long, low, 2-story, pretty efficient building, which we immediately outgrew. And as we began to develop different certification programs, and as we became a larger organization, we moved on, took over a number of other buildings along with this one, and finally moved into what is now our corporate headquarters on the same business campus. And this is the current corporate headquarters for PMI. If you're ever in the Philadelphia area, you ought to stop in. It's a sort of interesting building, particularly in office layout. It's gone through all the transitions from everybody has a private office to nobody has a private office. The pendulum keeps swinging. The interesting thing, of course, is that each floor is caught in another phase of the pendulum. So you see almost everything from offices to here's a piece of carpet, go sit in the corner, which I understand some of you guys actually like to do when you work, but I don't understand it. So what is PMI? We've been talking about this thing, this organization. It does certifications. It has memberships. But what is it? It's the largest professional organization of project managers in the world. It was incorporated in Delaware County, Pennsylvania in 1969 as a 501c6 not-for-profit corporation. And that has certain very interesting meanings. PMI is a volunteer-driven organization. Its board of directors is elected from among its members. Entire board is elected from among its members, and they are not paid. It's probably one of the few large corporations around Pennsylvania anyway, whose board members are not paid. We have approximately 575,000 to 600,000 members worldwide. We're in every country in the world. I don't think there's any place you can go that doesn't have some sort of a PMI contact. Now, even with its huge size, PMI is family. We were talking about this earlier. Once you join this organization, you tend to make friends that last for life, and you tend to find friends very easily. So you get that wonderful job. All of a sudden, somebody has decided you're going to run the installation of the new data center in Saudi Arabia. And they pack you up and send you to Saudi Arabia. If you are a member of PMI, you are immediately acceptable into a group of other people who are working there as expatriates. You will understand the culture of the country. You'll have people to support you in everything that you need in a land that is very different and very far away from your home. And I just picked Saudi Arabia out of the air. It could be someplace as far away as Bayonne, New Jersey. But you will, in fact, be able to find other people to support you in what you're doing and to provide you with almost anything you need. You're never without a friend in the world these days as a PMI member. We have 300 chapters. That means that all the major cities in the world have a PMI chapter of some kind or another. We have about 1 million certified professionals, which is a good percentage of the IT community at the managerial level, and that's what these people represent. But it's more than just the facts. It's more than how many certifications we have. It's more than the fact that we try to give back to the community in which we live. It's a lot of other things. The PMI decided last year that we really needed, as we approached 50 years, to return to the community some of what we have been fortunate to gain as an organization. So we committed 50,000 hours of volunteer service to the United Nations in January of last year. By May, we had reached 50,000 hours. So we committed another 50,000 hours. Last week, we reached 100,000 hours. 100,000 volunteer hours of service to different kinds of organizations all around the world, just because PMI members wanted to give back to the communities in which they live. PMI also has an educational foundation. And the educational foundation was founded primarily because chapters were coming to the national organization and saying, we have this guy in our chapter who has done so much for XYZ, we would like to give a scholarship in his name. And we tried running it ourselves, and we found out as project managers that it's pretty hard work to administer scholarships. What would you think of the national organization administering the scholarship? And the national organization or international organization took that on as a challenge, founded a nonprofit 501c3 charitable organization called the Project Management Educational Foundation, which gives grants, scholarships, all sorts of other programs, and runs this 50,000 or 100,000 hour program. If any of you need money, go to pmi.org. There are lots of scholarships out there. They're not very hard to get. The criteria is, are you taking a course related to project management? The answer is, yes, I'm taking a course. Because any course you're taking is related to project management these days. The scholarships aren't big, but I don't think any of you would mind another $1,000 here or there for books or housing or transportation or something else. They are still available right now. Get on there and go for some of them. They're not hard to do. One of the nice things about the scholarship program, which runs between $600,000 and $1 million a year in scholarships actually given, one of the nice things about it is that if you apply for a scholarship that really applies to what you're doing, and you're not awarded it, you're automatically eligible for any other scholarship. So you don't have to file 16 different forms to be looked at for different kinds of scholarship programs. Really, give it a try. There's money going that's not taken every year. PMI, though, does a lot of other things. PMI is leadership. PMI is teaching people how to become team leaders, and it's teams that are going to run major projects, how to become leaders in their communities and in their companies. And you can, I'm just going to flip through a few little quick pictures here. Some of our leaders. The lady on the right is the Vice President of Marketing for PMI and is certainly one of our strong leaders. We find leaders at local levels. These two young ladies are both leaders in the Delaware Valley chapter, and I think that was taken in San Diego at a leadership meeting that they attended. It's relationship building, and this is probably the most important thing that I think it is. It is the ability to meet folks and get to know some real true world leaders, not necessarily the one in the lower right-hand corner, but there are some really wonderful opportunities to build relationships with people all over the world that'll last for your entire life. It's a chance to exchange ideas in the strangest places, to sit down with somebody who was responsible for the Big Dig, somebody who closed a nuclear power plant. One of my close friends built a mine head and port in, I better not say the country, in a small country in South America. And he was called one day by his tugboat captain who said, we have this little problem. There's a small ship run aground and it's blocking the harbor, and we'd like permission to pull it off and get it on its way. And he said, certainly, why not? He said, well, you ought to know it's deck loaded with bales of marijuana. So he had to think about it for a while, and he finally, I think, authorized him to pull the thing off and just get away from it as fast as possible. But project managers have all kinds of interesting experiences. So you have chances to sit down with folk like this at PMI meetings, exchange your ideas, learn what their problems were and how they handled them. And I think it's sort of summarized in this poster that was at the New Orleans meeting in 2013. Some of the most interesting people I know, people I have ever met, I got to know through PMI congresses. The International Congress draws between 2,000 and 4,000 people a year to a major city somewhere around the United States. And there are 4 congresses. So you have one in the United States, you have one in Latin America, you have one in Europe, you have one in Asia, and one in South America. So you have an opportunity, if you want, to go to some, none, or all of them, and to experience a chance to meet, discuss, and learn from people all over the world. And you do meet some interesting people. Here's one I met. Any of you recognize this guy? Developer of the internet in Europe. PMI is advancing a profession. There was no project management profession when we started. There is today. There is a group of people who are professional project managers, whose job may not be to run specific corporate-directed projects, but whose jobs are to run the people who run the specific corporate projects. They're the people who are running the PMOs, the organizations that bring together all of the projects in a corporation and integrate them, and they're true professionals. There are now degree programs. Drexel University, for instance, now offers a master's and a PhD degree in project management, as does probably 10 or 12 other universities that I know of. So it's a real organization that's working towards building and making a profession that you can use to support your own life. We do this, of course, through seminars. through larger meetings. This is a Leadership Institute meeting where we bring together chapter presidents and officers and have small group workshops for how to run chapters, but we also have, larger group gatherings where we can hear from some really important speakers. An opportunity, again, to really share good ideas. PMI is also chapters. PMI is the local organizations that bring together the folks in Atlanta, whose ideas are then shared with the folks in Philadelphia or Memphis or New Orleans or wherever. And we exchange ideas through, this is a little out of date, through 300 chapters and through exchange of speakers and programs and ideas of how to run a chapter as well as how to increase our profession. And this is a Delaware Valley chapter meeting. So we have some relatively large chapter meetings. There was one here in Atlanta last night celebrating our 50th anniversary. 178 people attended, pretty good size for a chapter. So there's an opportunity to do things here locally. This is again from a chapter meeting. And with that, I'm going to shut up and give you an opportunity for the next 5 or 10 minutes if there are any questions you'd like to ask me. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy hearing about PMI. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Come on, I know there's some.
What changes in project management practice and technology do you anticipate we're going to have to start dealing with in the next few years?
I think the most challenging thing that we're going to be faced, if you want to come right down to the actual level of managing projects, is the size and complexity of projects. You think you're running big projects now, you ain't seen nothing. I really believe that in the next 10 years, projects will become so big that people can't run them. That if we don't begin to use artificial intelligence, if we don't begin to do some other things that are available to us, if we don't begin to apply a lot of the new sciences and techniques to how to organize and manage project-oriented work, we're not going to get it done. It's not necessarily the single project. It's that the big projects impact other big projects, which impact other big projects. So it's the portfolio of, for instance, all of the projects in the city. It just boggles my mind to try to get my arms around how would I manage every major project going on in the city of Atlanta at the same time, and do it in a way that we might be able to interagency exchange resources, things like that. So I think it's scope more than anything else. I think there's another challenge, and this one scares me to death. I'm beginning to see a lack of responsibility in a lot of areas. People are just not willing to step up and say, I take responsibility for doing the following work. There is a lack of truth, honesty, and ethics in so much of what goes on. I hate to say it about our country, but turn on the television and listen to what's going on in Foggy Bottom. I don't care what political party you are, there's stuff going on down there that's just plain not ethical. And if we continue to do that, you can't run a project unless you have honest exchange and honest information about what's going on in that project. So I think as project management educators and as project management leaders, we have to find some way to strengthen the ethics of the organization so that we begin to bring ourselves back to realism. And if we don't, well, who are we fooling? The country and the world is going to be at risk because of it. When you tell me that something is complete and it's not, when you tell me it's partially complete and it's not, when you tell me you need more resources or less resources than you actually know, that's unethical. And it's things like that that are going to destroy these very large projects. So I think it's those two issues that bother me the most, is the personality or the professional approaches to projects and the size of the projects. And they feed on each other. The bigger the project, the higher the probability that you're going to have some unethical things go on in it. Look at the Big Dig. Look at, well, there are all kinds of examples.
You guys all know what the Big Dig is?
Excuse me?
I've asked if some of the students knew what the Big Dig was.
Oh.
Some of them don't know.
How many of you know what Foggy Bottom is? For that was kind of you have to be kind of.
You guys have got to get out of the South. Put the grits down and take a trip.
How many people here know what Foggy Bottom is?
Foggy Bottom is Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. That's the actual name, the local name.
It's actually been called that because the land on which the capital of the United States was built was given to the federal government because they couldn't use it for anything else. It was just a big swamp. And from that day on, it's been a hot, humid place in the summertime and not a typically terribly good climatic place to live, and got the name Foggy Bottom. The Big Dig was the suppression, I call it, of all of the elevated roads around and through the city of Boston. And what they did was just dig a big hole, push them down in, cover them over. And I mean, it all sounds very simple, but they hit things like water and all sorts of other problems in doing it. For those of you who have never been to Boston, I will say it worked. It's an easy city to get around now, and I think it's done a lot for air pollution in that area too. Other questions? Sure.
What do you think are some of the most important qualities for a project manager to have in their career?
Boy, that's a tough one. Determination, honesty. I think those two are very important. You've got to have a really strong backbone to be a project manager. It's a lonely profession. It's a lonely profession because management above you doesn't like you because you're telling them things they don't want to hear, and management below you doesn't like you because you're telling them things they don't want to hear. So you have to have the ability to communicate bad news all the time. And it's this balance of being honest and having the ability to continue to push forward with what you believe to be right, I think are essential to project management.
I'm gonna say, I think, one of the keys of the project manager is to be able to push back on things that they think are being obfuscated or hidden, to say, what's going on? Do I believe this person? Do I believe these commitments and these timelines? And
you see,
my experience has been great project managers are able to uncover where, hey, maybe they're not telling the truth and do that. So it's diplomacy is amazing.
The problem with project manager is that until we get a position on the board of directors called Chief Project Officer, whose responsibility it is to manage the project managers on an equal basis with the financial people, with the marketing people, then you don't have a voice on the board. And I think that's coming very, very quickly. I think you're going to see a lot of companies who are putting a person on the board, calling them Chief Project Officer, and it's their responsibility to run the major projects in the corporation. And I think that's going to be an unbelievably wonderful opportunity for a professional project manager. But until that time, you're in this middle position. Project manager, at the completion of a very large, very complicated, very expensive, very frustrating project, if it turns out on time and on budget, you'll never ever hear your name. But if it fails, guess who's going to get the headline? So you just don't win. That's why we have called it a loan. That's why PMI becomes a family. People get into frustrating positions and they've got to go cry on somebody's shoulder.
So it's really a big support.
Yeah.
It's really what we're saying.
Yeah. It's a very difficult but a very satisfying profession, particularly when you pull things off. When you get that job done that nobody else thought could be done, and when you do it within the constraints that have been placed on the project. It's also important, another quality of a project manager is one who recognizes that when they have said over and over again, you cannot do it, do this work for this cost in this length of time to this quality. And the boss says, I don't really care, do it anyway. You have got to have the backbone to stand up and say, have a nice day, and walk out the door. And when employment rates are 1.3%, you can do that these days. No good project manager is looking for a job. I will tell you that right now. And we have got to begin to say to management, stop looking at what Wall Street says and listen to what's practical in terms of the people that have to do the work. And I think that's a very important part of the project manager's job.
One of the biggest challenges we face with project management client side is hybrid models where we have to do waterfall and agile, and we have to mix those both together, creating obviously lack of responsibility, ownership. So obviously with the last PM bot, we got started incorporating agile. Where do you see it going? I know. I'm taking what you said back to my client.
You pushed my button, you pushed my button because I think Agile is an excuse for not doing good project management. All of that having been said, Agile has a very, very important role to play, particularly in the IT community. Agile gives us the opportunity to manage unmanageable work. But I still can't understand the following scenario. CEO, you come to me and you say, boss, I got this project. I'm not real sure what it is. I don't know when it's going to end. It's going to cost about $4 or $5 million, but then again, it might be twice that much. How about you just give me $6 million and I'll go get started? That's the agile approach. I don't see how we can possibly undertake large-scale projects without understanding the endpoint, without understanding what the real objective is.
I think some of it goes back to, in the 1950s, the skunk works idea that we know we need to start down this path, and we don't necessarily able to say what will it look like in a year or two, and we're finding more and more companies without admitting they want to go into the kind of that development. We don't know what it'll look like. I think that's one of the reasons that it continues to get legs, saying I'm willing to place small bets because I need to start doing something here and I don't know what it is. And I think it dates back to the 50s skunk works and the idea of, hey, go do neat things and we'll figure out how to make money.
Yeah, and I think that's very acceptable within the scheme of the risk management profile of your company and how much risk you're willing to take. And I think it's a great approach for, let's take the banking industry. We got to put in ATMs. We don't know what ATMs look like. We don't know how many. We don't know where, but we know we got to put them in, and they're going to need some programming. Let's start it. I think that's a perfect agile approach. What scares me is when you do it with aircraft and flight control systems, because then planes drop in the ocean and people get killed. And some of that is because we didn't properly define what the endpoint was and adhere to the quality regulations of what we're trying to do. So, I think it's scope. It's how big is this project? What are the risks involved? If the risks are small, you can do a lot of things that you couldn't do where the risks are very much higher.
Hey, Jim, can we go ahead and wrap up for the sake
Yeah,
of
sure.
here? You guys are going to stay around for those that want to stay?
I'll be around if anybody wants to ask any other questions. I don't want to keep you.
It's your cue. It's your cue.